At 7:15 a.m. on October 5, 2025, over the cold, gray waters of the Yellow Sea, a U.S. RC-135 rivet joint reconnaissance aircraft was quietly tracking a North Korean Sango-2 submarine that had just surfaced after 48 hours underwater. For Pyongyang, such an act was nothing short of provocation. In response, they scrambled one of their fastest fighters, a MiG-29 Fulcrum, with a single, simple order: intimidate the Americans. But the pilot had no idea that over the next 72 minutes he was about to make a mistake that would destroy his career. This was no ordinary encounter. On one side stood outdated weaponry from the 1980s. On the other, a $67 million EA-18G Growler, America's airborne electronic warfare fortress, built to survive the deadliest battlefields on Earth. The MiG-29's desperate aggression lit a fuse in the sky, a spark that could ignite into something neither side was prepared to face. What would happen if North Korea fired first? And how would the United States respond? Let's uncover the truth. 7:15 a.m. October 5th, 2025. The Yellow Sea off the west coast of the Korean Peninsula. The skies over the Yellow Sea looked deceptively calm. Thin fog drifted low over the waves, and sunlight shimmered on the gray water like metal. But high above, an American RC-135 rivet joint reconnaissance jet from the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet was doing something that made Pyongyang very nervous. For 48 hours, a North Korean Sango-2 diesel-electric submarine had been submerged, running on battery power and silence. But submarines, like men, can't hold their breath forever. As its power levels dropped to 9%, the Sango-2 was forced to surface, just 62 nautical miles west of the Korean Peninsula, to recharge. Within seconds, the rivet joint sensors locked onto it. Its radar signature, exhaust temperature, acoustic pulse, every trace of sound a target. Inside the aircraft, two American operators watched as live telemetry streamed straight to the USS Theodore Roosevelt, a guided missile destroyer 42 miles away. Their mission? Identify, track, and record. Every ping, every pulse, every anomaly in the sea below was data, and data was power. Far to the north, in a hardened airfield near Wonsan, North Korea's Air Command had already noticed the intruder. Within 4 minutes, a MiG-29 Fulcrum roared off the runway, flying at 12,000 feet. Its mission: intercept and intimidate. The order was not to fire, but to push them away. But the crew aboard the rivet joint didn't flinch. To them, this wasn't an attack. It was an opportunity, a chance to harvest the electronic DNA of an old Soviet-built fighter trying to play Predator. The sea below was indifferent, its gray surface reflecting the shadow of the incoming jet. The other sought information. And in modern warfare, information always wins. At 7:22 a.m., the radar aboard the RC-135 lit up again, a fast-moving blip slicing across the upper edge of the scope. The MiG-29 Fulcrum, North Korea's most advanced airframe still flying from the 1980s, had just left Sinuiju Air Base. It climbed hard through 18,000 feet, accelerating to Mach 0.92, closing the distance at nearly 600 knots. Its orders were simple: intercept, intimidate, and make the Americans turn away. But the Americans were not moving. The RC-135 rivet joint held its course. 050 degrees east, altitude 26,000 feet, steady and calm. Inside, its 4 ALR-62 receivers and twin AN/AMQ-15 sensor arrays came alive, feeding raw data into a live relay link with the USS Theodore Roosevelt below. To the untrained eye, it looked like surveillance. To the professionals, it was electronic hunting. At 7:26, the MiG burst through the clouds, passing just 480 meters ahead of the rivet joint's nose, firing a pair of magnesium flares that burned at 2,000 degrees Celsius, bright enough to momentarily white out cockpit cameras. The gesture was pure theater, a warning dance in the open sky. But to the Americans, every second of that performance was worth more than gold. Hidden under the rivet joint's belly, ILANT pods began cataloging everything. Radar frequencies from 9.7 to 10.1 gigahertz, encrypted radio bursts cycling at 240 milliseconds, and the faint hum of the MiG's Klimov RD-33 engines. information that could define the fighter's fingerprint forever. Below, the North Korean Sango-2 submarine panicked. Hearing the sonic booms above, its commander ordered a crash dive. The move created a roar of cavitation bubbles louder than 185 decibels, easily detected by hydrophones across a 60-mile radius. In submarine warfare, that level of noise is suicide. The rivet joint's crew didn't need to speak. They simply watched the screen and smiled. Every reckless move from Pyongyang turned into another packet of exploitable intelligence. In a contest between nerves and numbers, one side was flaring, the other recording. And the more the fulcrum danced, the deeper it dug its own grave. Will the MiG-29 dare to open fire, or realize too late who it's dealing with? At 7:35 a.m., the North Korean MiG-29 broke formation and looped sharply to the right, climbing to 28,000 feet. Its radar, a N019 slot-back pulse Doppler system built in 1983, locked onto the American RC-135 with a shrill tone inside the pilot's headset. To Pyongyang, it was a moment of triumph. To the Americans, it was a countdown. Inside the rivet joint, every display flickered to life. The operators watched the incoming radar signal surge from 9.8 to 10.3 gigahertz, exactly as expected. One officer quietly marked the pattern. Frequency hop pattern predictable, within Soviet parameters. On the Roosevelt below, a single command was transmitted over Secure Link 16. Initiate electronic countermeasure. Package code, Iron Curtain. 3 seconds later, the sky changed. From 35 miles southwest, a U.S. Navy EA-18G Growler opened its ALQ-99 jamming pods. Beams of electromagnetic energy rippled through the air, invisible but devastating. The MiG's radar screen erupted in chaos. Dozens of phantom contacts appeared, flickering, spinning, multiplying. Some moved backward. One registered inside its own cockpit. The North Korean pilot jerked the stick, confused. He attempted to reacquire the target, boosting output power by 40%, but the more power he pushed, the more noise he created. His radar burned out its calibration cycle in 6 seconds. In that instant, the rivet joint vanished from his screen, replaced by a cloud of false returns stretching nearly 12 nautical miles wide. Down below, the Sango-2 submarine heard the electromagnetic storm through the water. Sensors saturated, communications scrambled. Thinking it was under attack, the sub dived again. The violent maneuver cracked its pressure hull's outer plating, causing a minor implosion at 120 meters depth, flooding one compartment. The Guardian had just crippled its own shadow. At 7:41, the Growler's electronic warfare officer received clearance. Use visual deterrent. The EA-18G rolled into the light, positioning itself above the MiG. A single AM-120 missile locked on instantly. Infrared and radar both confirmed. When it fired, the missile accelerated to Mach 4.1 in less than 2 seconds. The explosion came 1.8 seconds later. A bright orange bloom at 25,000 feet, scattering fragments across the sea. No parachute deployed. The radar trace dissolved. For the next 30 seconds, the sky fell silent again, except for the rivet joint's sensors, still recording everything. In 1 minute of combat, America had turned a provocation into a masterclass of domination. If you think the battle ended here, keep watching. The real shock comes next. By 7:45 a.m., the explosion had already faded into the sea mist. What remained was silence and data. Inside the RC-135 rivet joint, banks of screens glowed with streams of code and waveforms. Every electromagnetic pulse from the fallen MiG-29 had been captured, dissected, and stored. In 72 minutes of confrontation, the United States had harvested what analysts later called the single most comprehensive electronic snapshot of North Korean air power ever recorded. The haul was staggering. Over 18.4 terabytes of raw telemetry, radar sweeps, encrypted voice bursts, and engine harmonics from the Klimov RD-33 twin turbojets. The RC-135's analysts logged 114 distinct frequency hops, each revealing the MiG's obsolete encryption core, still based on Soviet 2001 algorithms. Even its identification friend or foe IFF codes were traced to legacy modules no longer used by modern air forces. Thermal cameras aboard the EA-18G Growler recorded every stage of the engagement. Exhaust ports glowing at 462 degrees Celsius. Transmission housing peaking at 198 degrees Celsius seconds before detonation. These signatures would later become the targeting reference for future missile guidance systems. The Fulcrum, in its final moments, had become its own instruction manual for destruction. Below the surface, the story was no better for Pyongyang. The Sango II submarine, shaken by the pressure wave from the blast, was forced into an emergency surfacing. Its noise profile, measured at 192 decibels, was tracked instantly by 5 sonar buoys and 2 American destroyers over a range of 58 nautical miles. Within minutes, its coordinates were triangulated, photographed, and archived, without a single shot fired. On board the USS Theodore Roosevelt, officers stood over glowing situation maps, silently watching the network update in real time. The entire sequence, from the MiG's takeoff to its destruction, had unfolded within a 72-minute window and ended with near-perfect data extraction. To most observers, it looked like a brief skirmish. To the Pentagon, it was a masterstroke of intelligence warfare. Every frequency jammed, every radar blinded, every noise recorded. Each second had value measured not in blood, but in information. When the rivet joint finally turned south toward Okinawa, its mission was complete. The Americans hadn't just survived the encounter, they had rewritten the rules of it. At 8:27 a.m., the RC-135 rivet joint broke formation and turned south toward Okinawa. Behind it, the Yellow Sea looked calm again. But in Washington and Pyongyang, that calm would echo for months. What had begun as a minor act of intimidation had turned into a catastrophic exposure of military secrets. A strategic disaster measured not in wreckage, but in information lost. Within 4 hours, the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command had decrypted fragments of North Korean radar codes, confirming vulnerabilities across 6 active MiG-29 units stationed from Wonsan to Nampo. Every one of them now had a signature traceable by sound, heat, or frequency. In short, they could be identified and neutralized before they ever appeared on radar. Satellite analysis revealed even more damage. The Sango II submarine's acoustic profile, logged during its chaotic dive, exposed the entire noise pattern of North Korea's diesel-electric fleet. The Pentagon now knew exactly how to find, track, and eliminate every sub the moment it surfaced. Pyongyang's Navy, once hidden beneath the waves, was suddenly visible to every sonar buoy from Japan to Guam. For the United States, the cost of this operation was zero. No pilots lost. No damage sustained. Yet the value of intelligence gained was estimated at over $1.3 billion. The equivalent of dismantling an entire air wing and submarine flotilla without firing a war. By 10 a.m., as the Roosevelt Task Group resumed patrol, one transmission summarized it all. Target neutralized. Full spectrum dominance confirmed. In less than 72 minutes of combat, America had rewritten the hierarchy of the skies over East Asia. The lesson was clear. Strength today is not measured by missiles or noise, but by the silence that follows when the enemy's systems go dark. For Pyongyang, the price of pride had been total exposure. For Washington, it was proof that the next great war might not be fought with bombs, but with bites, bandwidth, and brilliance. And as the rivet joint disappeared into the morning haze, its black box held not just recordings, but a message carved into history itself. In the age of information, the first to listen is the last to lose. By the afternoon of October 5th, 2025, the incident over the Yellow Sea had already become classified history. A victory never announced, but deeply understood. What the world saw as a brief aerial scuffle was, in truth, a revelation of power. The RC-135 rivet joint, with its antenna arrays and quiet operators, had turned a confrontation into an education. One North Korean MiG-29 was gone, a submarine humiliated, and a nation's most guarded secrets laid bare, all without the United States firing the first shot. For analysts in the Pentagon, it marked a turning point in electronic warfare. The engagement proved that America's full-spectrum dominance was not a slogan, but a reality. A seamless integration of intelligence, precision, and discipline. The ALQ-99 pods, the Growler's jamming suite, the rivet joint's silent sensors. Together, they formed a digital weapon more potent than any missile barrage. North Korea's loss went far beyond a destroyed jet. In less than 72 minutes, its encryption keys, radar fingerprints, and engine harmonics became part of the U.S. military's permanent database. Every future MiG, every sub, every radar pulse, recognizable before it even appeared. And as the sun set over the Yellow Sea, the message could not have been clearer. In the 21st century, war is no longer won by who fires first, but by who sees first, who understands faster, who controls the unseen. For those who watched from afar, the lesson was chilling but precise. Invisible wars now shape visible peace. And for the United States, that calm voice on the radio still echoed, "Mission complete. Dominance confirmed." The skies fell silent again, not in fear, but in absolute control. If you value this kind of analysis and want to keep uncovering the real lessons behind today's conflicts, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing you the untold stories of modern warfare.